Chapter 11. The Trinity of Parae. The Sahan River is not visible, but I can hear it unencumbered, winding, gulping itself as it trickles down the occasional diminutive cascade, widening in one place and thinning in the other. It is the first appeasing hint of life since we've come to the cruel and averse tundra. The unnamed mountains Saba had mentioned are just up ahead as well. Though unsung by name, they are acclaimed in their magnitude and daunting in their likeness to the teeth of the world, the unsheathed fangs of Oma. Our route is to circumvent them, for it would cost us more time to embark through them than around. Soon we shall be able to follow the river south into the bulk of the desert, but not before we cross the shallow of it onto its west bank. I seek Sa's warmth and energy to revitalize my wounds and to recoup my I glance over at Saba. He seems worn out as well, but the Tamas blood coursing through his vessel has cultivated enough pride as for him never to complain. He has not once mentioned the cold, his wounds, or the rough commute. He is unshakably determined. Too determined. He realizes that I am watching him.
We ought to walk parallel with the Sahan, but not near it. An appropriate measure to keep from being spotted by any merchant, or worse, pirate, commuting through these waters, for they are notorious for hosting slavers.
He knows that I was in contemplation about traveling alongside the river. Saba is sharp. He is certainly more intelligent than his manners and lack of civility lead one to presume. Understood. I nod to him. Though I hold in my possession the most detailed map in the world, he yet retains value as my compass and itinerary, for this chart cannot warn me of that which I must be warned of, nor can it inform me of any cultural knowings that may prove helpful or even crucial to our quest.
There is something else. It slipped my mind amidst the chaos earlier. Atop that creature's nest was an item of interest. It reeks of the sorrow and death that it was buried beneath. I, however, cannot read its markings. Though our tongues are very nearly interchangeable, the characters we use to represent our words differ enough to dissuade my trying.
He halts his advance and reaches into his garments just behind his left pec. Then, with a downcast expression occupying his face, one that tells of his disappointment in his inability to make out the writings, he hands me a stone tablet. It is written by Omani, certainly. However, this is of an older style of speaking, and it employs the old syllabary. Hence why it is that he cannot decipher the markings. The tablet reads, The Trinity of Parae, Entry 7, The Origins of the Artifacts. The map was gifted to Parae by the Drakin of Oma's largest moon, Ara. The Drakin are the overseers of our realms, and the appointed guardians of all worlds which host sentient life, Oma being one of several. The fan originated from the Wolf Queen, better known by the Omani as the Windwalker, and was linked to Parae during the war against Tiamatu. Before Tiamatu was defeated, the final piece, the key, came into being. Parae's key was... The rest has been carved out by the ages and is regrettably illegible. Who is the author of this entry? These ancient scriptures are separate from the chronicles of Parae and the battle for Oma, but most certainly pertain to the epics. They are written as supplemental texts. I've never seen nor heard of a third set of mythological passages surrounding Parae, or Tiamatu. There are a few scholars who recorded some details of the goddess of joy and the highest of deities, the god of balance, but the only verses written of Tiamatu are solely in the chronicles of Parae and the battle for Oma. Perhaps there is more to these myths than I'd like to believe. It isn't unlikely that there survives more scriptures than the ones we are familiar with. My memories surrounding the theological studies do not serve me well. Thus I may also be forgetting things. Important things.
And touch the map to the tablet.
That same angelic voice is present in my mind once again. I trust her. With the map rolled up in hand, I extend my reach toward the tablet. At the instant of what seemed as though a predestined and momentous contact between the tablet and the map, my soul is abruptly drained and extracted into the cosmos at a rate that transcends the measures of space and time, and therein I am bombarded with images and scenes from a long away and distant past. I can only make sense of so little in this barrage of memories. Some words and phrases latched onto me. Drakin, Ara, Tiamatu, extinction, incomplete. 3 must be worn by the one. One, but with 2 sides. Key. There is a sword, and it is in the image of these artifacts. A fine one, unlike any that came before it. There is also another, which comes after it, and it is even grander. It has life. It is life. These images, some of them are memories. But to whom do they belong? However, others seem to be prophetic, and are happenings yet to come. Why am I being shown any of this?
They are your memories. Or ought I say more particularly that they are your greatest ancestors' memories?
Her vocals, full of bliss and tuned to the key of love, could not lie. It dawns upon me with a weight of worlds, but with the delicacy of a long-sought-after light. I am the reincarnation of Parae. Yet this means someone, or rather something, may be the current reincarnate of Tiamatu.
You're on the right path, En. Tiamatu, however, has no soul. He has been deprived of it. Tiamatu, the abyss, is the cultivation of all suffering and nothing but. Pure alienation to true compassion and utterly foreign to authentic love. A miserable deity that has come to despise living beings as a corollary of his post, and by this has fooled even himself into what he believes is a virtuous pity. All of this under the ruse that suffering is abysmal and never-ending. And thus, in this belief, he, must intervene for the sake of all.
I allow her words to reverberate in a dulling repetition, ringing and bouncing along the construct of my being. Such dreadful energy from what she speaks. It is as a diametrically opposed spirit from her usually pleasant resonance. Somehow, it is nearly as though I can vaguely sense Tiamatu's very essence just from hearing his name spoken in my mind.
En, you ought to know that Tiamatu was never
A dark influx, heavy and swift, severs the bridge that served as our connection. It simply snaps as though it were stretched too thin by some mysterious pressure.
Omani, what do you see?
Saba's voice, acting as an outstretched hand in the perils of provoked and passionate waters, pulls me back to the dry land of my senses. We mustn't sit here and speculate. I feel as though our quest to unite our kingdoms will be met with a formidable opposition. That being said, we ought to continue to move forward and expand on our abilities along the way. We shall find need for them. He surely knows that I am dancing around his question.
Your secrets will hinder us, Omani.
We turn towards our destination and set forth. At last, we arrive at the first sight of a boundless sea of pink blush sand. A stark distinction from whence we came. The grains glitter as they are tossed into the arid wind, settling and sliding back down the slopes only to be cast through the air again and again. What a sight! I cannot help but feel so minuscule standing in front of this wondrous and expansive terrain. I scurry to it as its beauty gravitates my interest, dragging me, pulling me, reeling me into it. Oddly, the breezes from both the tundra and the desert do not mix. I can stick my arm halfway over the well-defined dividing border, as evidenced by the thawing permafrost of the Khan meeting with the radiating ground of the Vas, and I feel only heat on one side and cold on the other. It persuades my wonder of how much more I might have missed out on as I exhausted and drained my days back home into the usual, the expected, and the accustomed. Oma, the rest of Oma, is captivating. After fiddling with this strange yet fresh phenomenon for a few replenishing moments, We set forth towards the flowing and dripping acoustics of the Sahan, whilst keeping a quantified distance. Finally, we crossed where it shallows and branches. As we journeyed, my consciousness shifted back and forth from the mission at hand to concern for Kurvana. Her actions against us were desperate, and her intent was misled. When I peered deep into her soul, the initial sensations I felt were anger, hatred, and envy. Then, slight signals of fear and a longing to be accepted peeked their auras through the shroud that she layered around them. She but needed a friend, I whispered to myself.
Say again,
Saba asks as his windswept brow shoots upward. Did I truly just mutter that aloud? He definitely heard what I said. The heat must be getting to me. That can be my excuse. It is nothing. I'm just unsuited to such high temperatures, but I'll be just fine. I muster a disingenuous smile. He is skeptical. He has every right to be. I would carry the same distrust after that sorry excuse I just conjured. Saba turns his head to the right and spits a rather excessive amount of mucus onto the ground. Whether this is a sign of dissatisfaction against my obvious filter, or if this is him just being who he is up for debate. Regardless, something more pressing demands our scrutiny. There! I point ahead. After days of adjudged trekking through toiling sands, approximately a kalama in distance from us stands a modest village, isolated from the rest of Oma, afloat on top of the still waves of pale cardinal powder.
What we behold is Skashum, a Tamas village whose chief export is the vast nuts, and its only inhabitants are either craftsmen or growers, or, by their correct label, formers. Skashum is one of a small scattering of settlements that are situated on the west end of the desert.
He speaks with confidence in his knowledge. And what is a vast nut exactly?
I suppose you wouldn't know much about them since they only grow in areas of Tamas influence, particularly in a few remote locations spattered throughout the vast desert. There are nuts that span anywhere from 1 to 3 amma in proportion and have dense shells, which are used to craft weapons and armor.
That is amazing. My unquenchable thirst to learn and explore remounts my will. Perceiving my interest, he expands on his explanation without my asking.
The nuts take about 2 years of intense and skillful work to cultivate and harvest. This is the main reason that only the wealthiest of Tamas warriors possess so much as a vambrace.
He taps thrice on the back surface of his own vambrace, then continues.
Or a gauntlet made of this material. The inhabitants of this village see very little of the profit, for they are a kind whom have been exploited since the reception of their cursed gift.
I cannot discern whether he is gloating of his riches or hinting that he came about his vambrace by other more devious means. Nothing else about his demeanor or outfit point toward an impressive wealth. However, I am reminded of the missing portion of the treasure back in the Argul's den. He must have traded some of the loot for his vambrace. That's right. Now that I look back on it, I was certain that the talons of that undead bird were lodged into your arm. I am deeply impressed at the workings of this Tamas as well as the natural quality of this nut. However, it brings me deep pity to know that the formers fall prey to those who may never have their talent. I would like to meet these formers, I announce.
As there are no guards appointed here, this is manageable. Seldom does news spread to this town, and when it does, it is late and generally inconsequential to them. But for security measures, you must conceal your face and do little talking.
Saba hands me his bandana.
Wear it as I did in the tundra. Cover your head and refrain from looking up, lest your blue skin gives us away. Furthermore, do not go jumping into anyone's head, he warns.
I laugh. Is my curiosity for all things so apparent? And do I portray such an avidity for it that I'd forcefully take it? Perhaps this is something I'd examine within myself. You will be my translator, I suppose? I ask with faint echoes of my chuckle still present. Wouldn't want them catching wind of my accent.
I suppose, Omani, I suppose.
He's grown tired of me and my dry humor, especially considering that there is no need for me to speak, nor does my accent have any implication on my understanding of theirs. It is a poor habit of mine to speak for the sake of speaking. We stroll into the main square of Skashum. Short buildings, but intricate. The structures are entirely constructed with a tough glass that seems to contain clouds of mud and dust. The nimbi of each all move in a communicative, slow dance of unison, despite being located in different sections and blocks. When I peer closely, I can see that the swirling dust particles are living organisms toiling about in infinitum. How spectacularly peculiar! In the northern sector lays a field of what must be the sprouting Voss nuts. Not quite ripe, judging from their color in comparison with Sama's vambrace. I can count 10. I guess that's all they need to keep food on the table and sustain themselves for 2 long years. Directly behind it is another field. This plot looks as though it were incinerated recently. Determining from a more personal inspection, my estimate proves true. The looted field is scorched to a soot-filled blackness. By its tilling, another 10 or so nuts were perhaps grown here, or leastwise, the formers intended such. To the east, there are what seems to be living quarters with a rather lavish style of architecture for such a small village in the middle of nowhere. They are alike the other buildings in regard to material, but less cubic, and with spiraling pillars grasping the floors and ceilings like the hands of a giant supporting the slanted slopes of their angled roofs. Exquisite crafting. These designs must hail from a time before their exploiters caught wind of Skashum's rich resources and their masterful artisans. These Tamas show great skill in farming, crafting, and glassblowing. What strikes me as strange is that I have yet to see a single inhabitant out and about. At this time of day there ought to be some sort of activity or movement, especially so in Village of Rites. Where is everyone? Command, track. The nerves of my temples bulge and squirm in search for a signal. Bizarre. Saba, I say to him with concern, it appears that everyone is in their homes. They are alive, but it is credibly obvious that their days are numbered, judging from their frail pulsations. Despite my convinced wording, I report this in a tentative tone, lest my senses wane from our tiresome travels. He grumbles and marches over to one of the homes. The door swings open from the force of his genetic power. Why he chose to make such a dynamic entry is beyond the understanding of my Omanic ways. An alarming jerk or a defensive flinch, this was the least I'd expect from the 2 inhabitants who instead lay there, stagnant in their bed-ridden mess, soiled and defiled. Their countenances display that of an impenetrable numbness. They could not care less for Saba's hostile ingress. They are dying. They have been for some time. Saba initiates a conversation with the diseased figures in their native vernacular, applying a thicker dialect than the one he uses when speaking with me. One of them refuses to speak, or worse, she cannot muster the spirit to join in and contribute. The bags under their eyes resemble the wrinkles on the bark of a long-toppled tree. Their stares are emotionless and blank, save for a few drops of despair. The one who can speak, a tortured soul, mumbles the same words repeatedly. I cannot discern what they are through the muck of his enunciation and sickness.
They cannot sleep. It has been this way for 2 weeks. This one is begging us to execute him.
Saba's stern, unwavering tone does not depict any sorrow. The repeated, unobserved words of the perishing resident of this abode now becomes clear to me. They were, "Kill me." Without warning or admonition, Saba unsheathes his blade. In 2 fatal swoops, left then right, both of the moribund formers become truly as their titles suggest, formerly alive. This sense of dark humor, or rather, this desensitized wit is out of character for me. Saba was right about me. Through thought and action, I am growing relentless. There ought to be a stronger sense of disgust inside of me for their lives being taken so inconsiderably, without exhausting any alternative recourse. I clutch the map and fan behind my garments tight. I cannot fall victim to this overwhelming deflection from purity. My soul is good. I proclaim it thus. In this moment, my tracking sense alerts me of a breach. Who's here? And how'd they get so near before either of us noticed? In my dismay, what appears to be a large aphid tail shoots through one of the walls and nails Saba into the ceiling with some sort of stinger, which detaches from its end. The tail quickly retracts before I can get to it. Shortly thereafter, a volley of thick, mucus-covered balls fly through the exposed hole at a rate that sounds similar to hundreds of birds flapping their wings in panic. Each sphere explodes on impact, filling the room with a condensed toxic agent. I hastily cover my nose and mouth. Think, think, think! I look up to find that Saba is already incapacitated. The noxious gas is beginning to stagger me as well. I need to clear a large opening in this structure, and I must do so swiftly. Command, mimic Drakin. My body contorts, my nose indents, my scales emerge, and my eyes flicker. Interesting. My giddiness is fading whilst I bear this expression. I am not prone to fumes and poisons that would otherwise suffocate me in my base form. A welcome and advantageous property of this transformation. Now, to dissipate this toxin. Command, astral air. A vigorous chop to my nape dismembers my Drakin style and leaves me slipping into an unconscious state. Where did you? My words flutter unfinished, caged in the blur. Resisting the tug of the pummel-induced drowsiness evinces a futile struggle. I waver in my light. A hunched contour speaks as the cloud disperse around it, gradually revealing my assailant.
You mistook the toxin solely as the attack. I am the toxin.
His vocal cords wheeze each syllable that he speaks. A cloaked, obese, and despicable excuse of a Tamasu stands, slumped before me, his proportions entirely asymmetrical. One hand is twice the other, one leg triple its neighbor. His face is all the more unfavorable. His movement a grade lower than that. This thing claims to become and unbecome the toxin he exudes. Another figure approaches. The one with the tail. A slender female with a tight, tessellating shell of color hugging her body and refusing her face as the sole exception. Her eyes holster a mirroring blackness and remain in a natural squint. Her features are of an unbefitting contrast to her companion, yet her character is equally as pompous.
Ah, are you sleepy?
She cackles at her own tease. The vestige of mirth is the last of what I hear before straying into the dark.